Section 27 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Section 27. Gently the yellow curtain with all the birds of paradise blew out, and it seemed as if there were a flight of wings into the room, right out, then sucked back, for the windows were open. Was it draughty? Ellie Henderson wondered. She was subject to chills. But it did not matter that she should come down sneezing tomorrow. It was the girls with their naked shoulders she thought of, being trained to think of others by an old father, an invalid, late vicar of Burton, but he was dead now. And her chills never went to her chest, never. It was the girls she thought of, the young girls with their bare shoulders, she herself having always been a wisp of a creature, with her thin hair and meagre profile, though now, past 50, there was beginning to shine through some mild beam, something purified into distinction by years of self-abnegation, but obscured again, perpetually, by her distressing gentility, her panic fear, which arose from £300 income, and her weaponless state. She could not earn a penny. And it made her timid, and more disqualified year by year to meet well-dressed people who did this sort of thing every night of the season, merely telling their maids, "I'll wear so-and-so," whereas Ellie Henderson ran out nervously and bought cheap pink flowers, half a dozen, and then threw a shawl over her old black dress. For her invitation to Clarissa's party had come at the last moment. She was not quite happy about it. She had a sort of feeling that Clarissa had not meant to ask her this year. Why should she? There was no reason, really, except that they had always known each other. Indeed, they were cousins. But naturally they had rather drifted apart, Clarissa being so sought after. It was an event to her, going to a party. It was quite a treat just to see the lovely clothes. Wasn't that Elizabeth, grown up, with her hair done in the fashionable way, in the pink dress? Yet she could not be more than 17. She was very, very handsome. But girls, when they first came out, didn't seem to wear white as they used. She must remember everything to tell Edith. Girls wore straight frocks, perfectly tight, with skirts well above the ankles. It was not becoming, she thought. So with her weak eyesight, Ellie Henderson craned rather forward, and it wasn't so much she who minded not having anyone to talk to. She hardly knew anybody there, for she felt that they were all such interesting people to watch, politicians presumably, Richard Dalloway's friends. But it was Richard himself who felt that he could not let the poor creature go on standing there all the evening by herself. "Well, Ellie, and how's the world treating you?" he said in his genial way, and Ellie Henderson, getting nervous and flushing and feeling that it was extraordinarily nice of him to come and talk to her, said that many people really felt the heat more than the cold. "Yes, they do," said Richard Dalloway. "Yes." But what more did one say? "Hello, Richard," said somebody, taking him by the elbow, and good Lord, there was old Peter Walsh. He was delighted to see him, ever so pleased to see him. He hadn't changed a bit. And off they went together, walking right across the room, giving each other little pats, as if they hadn't met for a long time, Ellie Henderson thought, watching them go. Certain she knew that man's face. A tall man, middle-aged, rather fine eyes, dark, wearing spectacles, with a look of John Burroughs. Edith would be sure to know. The curtain with its flight of birds of paradise blew out again, and Clarissa saw Ralph Lyon beat it back, and go on talking. So it wasn't a failure after all. It was going to be all right now, her party. It had begun. It had started. But it was still touch and go. She must stand there for the present. People seemed to come in a rush. Colonel and Mrs. Garrard, Mr. Hugh Whitbread, Mr. Bowley, Mrs. Hilbery, Lady Mary Maddox, Mr. Quinn, intoned Wilkin. She had 6 or 7 words with each, and they went on. They went into the rooms, into something now, not nothing, since Ralph Lyon had beat back the curtain. And yet, for her own part, it was too much of an effort. She was not enjoying it. It was too much like being just anybody standing there. Anybody could do it. Yet this anybody she did a little admire, couldn't help feeling that she had, anyhow, made this happen, that it marked a stage, this post that she felt herself to have become, for oddly enough she had quite forgotten what she looked like. But she felt herself a stake driven in at the top of her stairs. Every time she gave a party she had this feeling of being something not herself, and that everyone was unreal in one way, much more real in another. It was, she thought, partly their clothes, partly being taken out of their ordinary ways, partly the background. It was possible to say things you couldn't say anyhow else, things that needed an effort, possible to go much deeper, but not for her, not yet anyhow. "How delightful to see you," she said. Dear old Sir Harry. He would know everyone. And what was so odd about it was the sense one had as they came up the stairs, one after another. Mrs. Mountain Celia, Herbert Ainsty, Mrs. Dacres, oh, and Lady Bruton. How awfully good of you to come, she said, and she meant it. It was odd how, standing there, one felt them going on, some quite old, some... What name? Lady Rossiter. But who on earth was Lady Rossiter? Clarissa! That voice! It was Sally Seton! Sally Seton! After all these years! She loomed through a mist. For she hadn't looked like that, Sally Seton, when Clarissa grasped the hot water can. To think of her under this roof! Not like that! All on top of each other, embarrassed, laughing, words tumbled out, passing through London, heard from Clara Hayden. What a chance of seeing you! So I thrust myself in without an invitation. One might put down the hot water can quite composedly. The lustre had gone out of her. Yet it was extraordinary to see her again, older, happier, less lovely. They kissed each other, first this cheek then that, and Clarissa turned, with Sally's hand in hers, and saw her rooms full, heard the roar of voices, saw the candlesticks, the blowing curtains, and the roses which Richard had given her. "I have 5 enormous boys," said Sally. She had the simplest egotism and most open desire to be thought first always, and Clarissa loved her for being still like that. "I can't believe it," she cried, kindling all over with pleasure at the thought of the past. But alas, Wilkins wanted her. Wilkins was emitting in a voice of commanding authority, as if the whole company must be admonished and the hostess reclaimed from frivolity, one name. "The Prime Minister," said Peter Walsh. The Prime Minister? Was it really? Ellie Henderson marvelled. What a thing to tell Edith! One couldn't laugh at him. He looked so ordinary. You might have stood him behind a counter and bought biscuits. Poor chap, all rigged up in gold lace. And to be fair, as he went his rounds, first with Clarissa, then with Richard escorting him, he did it very well. He tried to look somebody. It was amusing to watch. Nobody looked at him. They just went on talking, yet it was perfectly plain that they all knew, felt to the marrow of their bones, this majesty passing, this symbol of what they all stood for, English society. Old Lady Bruton, and she looked very fine too, very stalwart in her lace, swam up, and they withdrew into a little room which at once became spied upon, guarded, and a sort of stir and rustle rippled through every one openly. The Prime Minister! Lord, the snobbery of the English, thought Peter Walsh, standing in the corner. How they love dressing up in gold lace and doing homage. There. That must be, by Jove, it was Hugh Whitbread snuffing round the precincts of the great, grown rather fatter, rather whiter, the admirable Hugh. He looked always as if he were on duty, thought Peter, a privileged but secretive being, hoarding secrets which he would die to defend, though it was only some little piece of tittle-tattle dropped by a court footman, which would be in all the papers tomorrow. Such were his rattles, his baubles, in playing with which he had grown white, come to the verge of old age, enjoying the respect and affection of all who had the privilege of knowing this type of the English public school man. Inevitably one made up things like that about Hugh. That was his style, the style of those admirable letters which Peter had read thousands of miles across the sea in the Times, and had thanked God he was out of that pernicious hubble-bubble, if it were only to hear baboons chatter and coolies beat their wives. An olive-skinned youth from one of the universities stood obsequiously by. Him he would patronise, initiate, teach how to get on, for he liked nothing better than doing kindnesses, making the hearts of old ladies palpitate with the joy of being thought of in their age, their affliction, thinking themselves quite forgotten. Yet here was dear Hugh driving up and spending an hour talking of the past, remembering trifles, praising the homemade cake, though Hugh might eat cake with a duchess any day of his life, and to look at him probably did spend a good deal of time in that agreeable occupation. The all-judging, the all-merciful might excuse. Peter Walsh had no mercy. Villains there must be, and God knows the rascals who get hanged for battering the brains of a girl out in a train do less harm on the whole than Hugh Whitbread and his kindness. Look at him now, on tiptoe, dancing forward, bowing and scraping as the Prime Minister and Lady Bruton emerged, intimating for all the world to see that he was privileged to say something private, to Lady Bruton as she passed. She stopped. She wagged her fine old head. She was thanking him, presumably, for some piece of civility. She had her toadies, minor officials in government offices who ran about putting through little jobs on her behalf, in return for which she gave them luncheon. But she'd arrived from the 18th century. She was all right. And now Clarissa escorted her Prime Minister down the room, prancing, sparkling, with the stateliness of her grey hair. She wore earrings and a silver-green mermaid's dress. Lolloping on the waves and braiding her tresses, she seemed, having that gift still, to be, to exist, to sum it all up in the moment as she passed, turned, caught her scarf in some other woman's dress, unhitched it, laughed, all with the most perfect ease and air of creature floating in its element. But age had brushed her, even as a mermaid might behold in her glass the setting sun on some very clear evening over the waves. There was a breath of tenderness. Her severity, her prudery, her woodenness were all warmed through now, and she had about her, as she said goodbye to the thick gold-laced man, who was doing his best, and good luck to him, to look important, an inexpressible dignity, an exquisite cordiality, as if she wished the whole world well, and must now, being on the very verge and rim of things, take her leave. So she made him think, but he was not in love. End of section 27. Read by Hannah Dormer, London, 24th of October 2021.